Well, I'm glad to see that some people have the devices with them because I don't, which is unfortunate because this is an art talk. So I'm hoping that you guys will all take a moment to put yourself in the space of remembering creativity and imagination and all of that. And I don't have anything to show, unfortunately. But I'm sure that you guys all have opinions on game art and the kinds of games that you like. So I would actually like to take a couple of minutes just to kind of get a feel for the room, like where you guys are coming from, if you guys are all developers, if some of you guys are developers / artists, if you guys have worked with artists, if you know what that relationship is like. I'm just really curious as to sort of who's in the room. If is anybody like a developer working for a studio right now? A couple, okay. Is anybody, are there students here? A couple students. Are there artists here? Yeah, awesome. That's good to know. So that's a pretty good little mix-up of people. I have a number of questions that I've kind of prepared for the night in terms of just things that I'd like to talk about. The questions that I've been, I just went on vacation last week. I was in Cuba, and I was kind of prepping for the kinds of questions that I wanted to ask, and I was like, if I would meet people who were into games, I'd be like, oh, what do you think about this? And then we'd have this like hour-long discussion about, you know, is it worthwhile to like reskin a game, take something that already exists and just like throw new art on it, and is that a viable, you know, form of a new game, or things like that. So I've been dealing with the questions, and so far I haven't needed to have like a projector with stuff. So I'm hopeful that we'll have like a really cool, interesting discussion about sort of the role of art. If at any point you guys have anything you want to add in terms of like new questions to bring up, or if you want to challenge whatever statement maybe that I make or somebody else makes or whatever, this is totally this is a safe space. There will be no judgment here. So I would really like for everybody to feel comfortable to go ahead and say something and bring anything up that, you know, comes to mind or whatever. So I guess I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Tara Phillips. I am the art director at Snowden Studios. I've been working there for about 2 years now. Before that, I was a freelance illustrator and graphic designer, so I have a degree in design, so I kind of do a lot of different things. And working for an indie studio is really great for me because I'm not the kind of person who does well just by like draw trees for a year. You know, sit in a corner in a department of people that are all just sitting there doing the same thing for, you know, a year. I love what I love about indie games is that, and working in an indie studio, is that every day I have like 7 different things that I'm working on. And, you know, over here I'll be doing some graphic design stuff. Over here I'll be doing some UI. Over here I'll be doing like character design. Over here I'll be like creating assets for sprite sheets. And, you know, every day is just a great little mix-up of stuff, and you get to have, the one thing I really love is you get to have that interaction with developers. So we all work in a space that's pretty comparable to the space of this room, and there's 12 of us, 2 artists, and the rest of them are all developers. So I really quickly got to learn the language. I had never worked in games before I started at Snowden. I'd worked with like web developers, but that's a whole other language. So coming into working in a game studio was really a quick learning curve. But I love that relationship between coming from the art side and having somebody to bounce ideas off of that's from a technical side, because I feel there's a really good chance to kind of push one and the other. If you can find that in an artist-developer relationship, that's like a really great thing, and the guys at Snowden are fantastic for that. So that's me. I'm going to start off with my first question, and this is an open question for the room. what are some of your, if you think of games that have struck you at any point in your life in terms of visuals, that maybe didn't have the best game mechanics, but there was just, it had that something visually that you were just like, I just want to play this just so that I can see what's coming up next, right? I want to explore that world, or I want to see, like, if I make this combination of something, what will happen? Does anybody have, like, in your entire life playing games, a game that comes to mind for that? Yeah.
The first Gears of War, for the first time ever.
Yeah.
Definitely that.
So what did you like about it?
Probably the water shader.
So you're coming at it from like
It was really realistic at first. Like I was always like Nintendo, you know, very low poly, and then suddenly I go over to my cousin's house and they're playing on the Xbox 360. They have Gears of War on. I'm like, oh my god, what's this? It's so awesome. It's so realistic, and that really blew me away. So as a 3D artist, I want to aim for something like that.
Awesome. Yeah.
Shadow of the Colossus.
It's on my list.
Yep. And yeah, it's basically the entire thing. The game is basically boss fights and atmospheres.
Yeah.
That's basically what holds it together. The atmosphere is so just engulfing, so huge. Especially love the final battle and just the feel between the visuals, the music. It just feels epic. It's still the game that sticks in my mind as, okay, I think epic. This is the game.
I think epic is a really fantastic word to describe that game, because without the art style that it had, it wouldn't have felt the same way. I mean, it would have just been, music and boss battles, right?
Without the art, then it would be a bunch of puzzle bosses, and that's it.
Yeah. Anybody else have any, like, yeah?
I would say the BioShock franchise is probably one of my favorite franchises because I love how they did the art with the water, almost kind of similar to the water in Gears of War, but they made it so dramatic that it actually told a story when you enter certain corridors and certain rooms and there's like leaks and there's like water on the floor and stuff. Like there's a lot of stuff that's happened during like the destruction of Rapture, and I thought it was really cool that the environment basically drew you in because of that. And like I love the lighting in it. I love, aside from the mechanics, I love the period that it was in, the 1960s period, and all the art deco and stuff. That drew me in hardcore. So I always stick to BioShock. Every single time a new game comes out, I get the next one. And
Yeah, so you're a believer.
Always awestruck, yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome. Anybody else? Yeah.
I've got a few in my mind, but the first and probably the most obvious answer is anything by that game company, most notably Flower and Journey. Those two games were basically defined by their art style because the entire narrative works around the aesthetic of the games, and they were absolutely beautiful. The other one that I feel is worth mentioning is Remember Me. Even though the game itself was alright, the aesthetic I found was especially nice. The way that they incorporated the whole Lich theme into the gameplay and into the world and how the art was built, I thought was fantastic. Particularly in how they implemented the UI into the world so that it felt all as one holistic experience rather than just having UI jammed in your face as a separate component of the world.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. Like the only game that I've actually played of those ones that you just mentioned was Flower, and that was something that really struck me, like right down to the end credits. Like you play through the end credits, which is really, like I've only played it on the PS4, so I don't know if it's the same version for all across the board, but like it was to me the most interesting end credits I've ever seen. The fact that you have to like go and hit every name and collect all these. Collect points. You're not really collecting anything, but it's that experience. It's yeah. Anybody else? Yeah.
It's current. It's Broken Age.
Okay.
I'm the backer for the project, so I got insight into the development and all the stuff that goes into the artwork and the music and everything like that. So it's just being finally seeing it, being drawn into that world is just so delightful. So much attention to so many details in so many ways. Presented very simply, but very rich, and engaging and rewarding as an experience.
So that is a really great segue into one of my questions, and it's further down on my list, and I think that this is a good time to bring it up, is for all of you guys, if you are kind of, like, I mean, as an artist, I troll, like, conceptart.com, like, all those other places where, CG Hub and stuff, where you see all this stuff kind of being released, and you're kind of just feeding off of it, and you're really excited about all these games that are coming out. Is that and, like, the release of art books, is that something that you think is a really, like, valid part of, buying into a game?
Specifically the pre-final.
The pre.
It gives you a personal attachment, of course, because you're feeling like you're a part of the development of the game. So, I don't know. It's never been a big thing for me,
It's interesting.
but I can see how it's a personal attachment.
Understanding how they got there. Seeing the end product is one thing. It's like behind the scenes for movies or anything else. When you see all the steps, all the iterations they went through, all the possibilities that they threw out, what they ended up with and why they ended up with those choices, I think is very insightful as a designer. That you realize that you really just can't just come up with an idea and say, well, good enough. No. Keep working at it. You have to really trash it all out and see if explore all the possibilities before settling on what you consider to be the best.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And there are certain art books and art styles, like like the early Metal Gear games, and all the Final Fantasy stuff. Like that's always that is what I grew up like wanting to be a part of, and to me, like getting that kind of inside look at this is the art that started it all. And yeah, maybe it ended up turning it looking like this. But that's kind of really cool to see that it came from this and like it turned into that, which sometimes is very different. And sometimes is very similar, which is also staggering as well. When you see like what the artists started with and the fact that it could be translated so well into a game state is also really cool.
I think it's also encouraging for budding artists who are like so easily discouraged. God, I'll never be that good. I'll never be good. Well, nobody starts off being that good. Everybody has crude paths and awful drawing stuff like that. And there was one book in chapter I saw the other day, was the art of Blizzard. Big fat book from the very early days, the Warcraft days, pre-Warcraft days up until present. And you see how they evolved as a company, how the art style evolved, how the talent evolved, and stuff like that. So I think for our budding artists, it's encouraging to see that everybody starts crude, and that you just keep at it. And over time, you'll get better.
Yeah, there's a few artists, and I feel terrible because I don't know the real names, but I follow a lot of people on DeviantArt. I've been there for 10 years, and people that I've sort of followed their careers is seeing how they started, and then I see them like starting to work at a game company or something like that, and just like watching their work evolve. And there are so many people that start off before getting into their first job being like, well, my work isn't the best, and that's fine as long as you keep progressing, right? And I think it's really cool to see the progression of artists that are in the gaming industry as well. I know it's kind of like a side point, but it's really one of those things that the more you do it, the better you get, right? Like it's pretty self-evident. Does anybody else have any points to make on that? Yeah.
Yeah, regarding the initial question,
Yeah.
I think it's worth making a distinction between aesthetic and the art itself, like concept art, how prettily it's drawn. Because I'd say personally, I might not get so excited over it, like, okay, that's really nice concept art, I'll appreciate it. Yes, that's nice concept art, but is it going to look that way in the final game? Versus the aesthetic, that at least gives you a better idea as to how it's going to look at the end. And I think the aesthetic more than the art has definitely influenced my hype over certain games.
So how it ends up looking in the game, like how it's translated?
More so the, hard to find an alternate word than aesthetic. the style that's being used.
Okay, so like a more realistic style, or for example, like in BioShock, where it's that Art Nouveau,
Yeah, it's like
certain period sort of inspiration. So is that?
yeah, like I might be more excited over if I see 2 concept arts for 2 games, but one of them is done with Art Deco. It's like, oh yeah, Art Deco, I really like that. So I'm going to be more excited over that than say just pure realism.
That is a fantastic segue into my next question, if nobody has anything else to add to that. Okay, so here's it. This is an interesting question in my opinion. Is hyperrealism better than reality? So I'm talking about like the hype over creating super realistic graphics. I'm thinking especially of like all those sports games that are coming out now, and everybody's saying you can see every glisten of sweat on their skin, and oh my goodness, the fabric moves so beautifully. And also in relation to that, if you think about games that came out 10 years ago that everybody was really excited about how realistic it looked, what allows a game, the game art especially, to stand the test of time, especially when we're talking about hyperrealism?
That's a good one.
I think that hyperrealism is a novelty thing. If you compare the hyperrealism and effects in movies, or the effects takes a movie for a while there, the effects in movies would blow people away. Now they take it for granted. Right? The hyperrealism, whatever. I think the same thing will happen with games. I think for art to be meaningful, it has to leave a lasting impression. Team Fortress 2 kind of rocked the world because they decided to go cartoony. They decided to go caricature. And all of a sudden it took the game, that type of game, to a whole new level. And it also expanded the audience because it took the seriousness out of it. It lightened up the game a little bit. You could have fun and not worrying about dying, or being super, better than the other person. You're just going to have fun. So what a wonderful decision where art actually influences the gameplay and actually expands the audience. So that's where art has a meaning in the game, not just a visual aesthetic.
Yeah.
It can also set the mood too, I find, with certain ways of making the environment or making certain characters look like. Let's say, for example, I'm just going to go with the Legend of Zelda series. So you had Twilight Princess, where they actually made it dark. They made it more realistic textures. So it kind of made you feel kind of tense. And then when they made Skyward Sword, they decided to change it so it was more like a watercolor painting, and it kind of just brought your mood up to a more positive, more lighten up. So that while you're playing, it's not like it is some serious situations with an enemy, but it's more, you don't feel as tense. So it's really cool how some ways of texturing and ways of adding certain effects to a piece bring a difference in your mood. So hyperrealism is great. It's nice, but for me everyone tries to go for the most realistic. So where's you stop and then you just kind of use that and recycle it and just go on with the next game. It's hard trying to make something hyper realistic, whereas it looks like how we're sitting right here, we're all models. So it's hard trying to manage that. It might take a few more times to perfect that.
Well, and then my next, sorry, go ahead. I was going to say, well, my next point on that would be well, do we actually want to just see a room full of people, that we would see every day in real life, or do we want to see something different, right?
That's actually sort of along the same lines as what I was going to say, was that hyperrealism in and of itself is actually a bit of a red herring. It's not really while the hyperrealism will increase the hype of the game because everybody thinks they want that. What I really find is important for a game is whether the look serves the mood, serves the gameplay, etc. And okay, in some games, sure, fine, hyperrealism is going to help that. In other games, well, wouldn't it be better to go for a more stylized look? Wouldn't it be? And in fact, in a lot of games, it would be better to go for a more stylized look and make it the overall look and feel match the game itself, rather than just going, okay, everybody wants as many polygons in there as possible.
How many polygons can we count? It's interesting to me that a lot of the games that really push for the hyperrealism are like the sports games and like the racing games and those kinds of games that don't have the freedom to do something non-realistic because they're expected to be like to portray something that we, you know, experience in real life, quote unquote. But what about for something like, say, GTA, when, you know, the new game came out, everybody was like, it's so real, we can do like everything in life in this game. And personally, I find that is really interesting, and what it says about like people, what they want to do, and if you want to spend your day playing a video game of doing yoga, like, I don't know, that just seems odd to me. But no judgment. Anybody else have any? Yeah?
It seems to me that hyperrealism, even though it's very popular in certain contexts, its big problem is that it has no longevity. And almost all the games that focus on hyperrealism are also the ones that just have iterations that keep coming out every year or every second year. And they never age well, that's always true. But they're also the ones that, not the least memorable, but the least likely to go back and play them again years past.
Did anybody play GoldenEye when it first came out? And was everybody like, oh my god, this is the most amazing looking game ever? And now you look at it and you're like, oh, don't think I could touch that. It's so unplayable.
So I have a question about the realistic visuals and everything. How about immersion? How does it impact immersion, and does that influence have any type of long-standing longevity or whatever?
What do you mean by immersion? Like,
let's say, how much of a realistic visual presentation is going to make the player feel like they are in that world versus an unrealistic?
I imagine it would depend on which game you're talking about specifically. Because like Metro Last Light, I got really immersed in that game right off the bat. It was dark, gritty, the whole thing just pulled you into that scenario. But on the opposite side, the new Legend of Zelda game, Link Between Worlds, no hyperrealism whatsoever, and I didn't put it down the first couple days I had it. I beat it in 3 days.
So when you say something like that, I mean, I totally agree. I have the same things come up. Does that actually mean that this realistic visuals does not have an impact on immersion, period?
I think it actually has a negative impact on immersion, actually. The more realistic something is for me to play. No, I'm broken. I just played PC games still from abandonware. My favorite game is Super Mario World, and I don't care. But the point, though, is that, like, for me, at least, the more realistic it gets, my brain kind of switches. I switch from, I'm playing a game, because I know I'm playing like the new Zelda game. It's a game, I can tell it's a game, it's two-dimensional, it's kind of out there. But when I start playing like Mass Effect or Assassin's Creed 4, etc., and I love the Assassin's Creed, but they're like, I feel like I'm watching a movie, and I get the suspension of disbelief, but only so far as I'm able to experience it as a person viewing it, not a person in it. For me, I need imagination. I need to have the graphics actually be less realistic so I can fill in the gaps myself. When I fill in the gaps with my imagination, I tend to project or portray my own wants, desires, and goals into those things. So I think that's what it does for me. Like I guess my ultimate favorite immersion game was Pirates by Sid Meier. I like that game more than anything because I got a text box and told me what I was doing. But beyond that, I decided where I went and what motivated me to go there. I'd invent very rich histories for why my so-called character would do what I wanted it to do. But if I'm playing like Mass Effect, I'm Captain Shepard. You know, I'm not really, you know, I can kind of get out my need to be evil through that game, but at the same time, it's not the same for me. So I don't know what, like obviously everyone's got a different opinion, but
I agree with that.
immersion, immersion to me is inversely compared to the graphics they give me. Give me less, and I fill in the rest.
I think it really comes down to what you're taking to the game, right? Like if you want to go and play a game to escape something, or if you want to go and play a game just to fill, a half an hour before you go to an appointment or something like that, right? It's like really your mind state before like you go into the game and what you want that to be for you. And if you're going into a game wanting, some kind of fantastical world, and you play the new Gran Turismo game, maybe, it depends on the person, right? Like it really, for me, that's not going to do it, right? But maybe for somebody else it does. And I think for people who want to use their imagination and be told a story and experience something, maybe less realistic is the way to go, because you're allowed to fill those gaps, like you said. You can make your own sort of story out of what you see.
You gotta watch a movie and think I'm in the movie.
Well, I think also, you mentioned the sports and stuff like that. I'm not a big sports fan. My father was. And I imagine that the hyper-realism of those games, appeals to the sports people because it's wish fulfilling, and they have some control over the plays and stuff. They're not just granting and the reps and stuff like, okay, get in there, do something about it. The more realistic it is for them, I think, the more they feel like they're participating in a simulation, in a live event. You give them Wii Sports, and they're probably going to go, what the, this is, no. Sorry. I'm just speculating, but there may be, depending on the nature of your audience, realism has a purpose, and the style of what you're trying to experience. And it's especially just believe in cartoons and stuff like that, where it's an agreement, like in film, where like, you take me on a ride, I'm willing, as long as you don't mess up. It's like it's a partnership that you have, an agreement, and you can if you're both on the same page about it, then it's a wonderful experience and it'll be incredibly immersive.
I think that like for sports games and stuff like that, I don't play a lot of sports games. I know people who do, and it's interesting because there's kind of like two little groups. There's the people who want to play it and like control everything, and then there are the people who want to play it but not actually be good at it and have to like make all the decisions, and they get really frustrated when they actually have to like control every little thing that goes on. So like for me, I loved playing like the old Nintendo Super Spike V-Ball and like World Cup Soccer, which is the most like unrealistic, like absolutely fantastic though at the same time. And like I could play those for hours and hours with my brothers, but like I could not sit down and play like a modern, I don't even know what games are out now, but like I don't know. It feels like there's too many buttons to press and know what you're doing. But some people really like that, right? It's that simulation thing. So maybe that's the relationship there, is if you want like a simulation, if you want to experience something that you don't usually experience in real life, then maybe that's where hyperrealism should live.
Yeah, I see it more in sports games rather than some other games that I've seen. Like, I'm the kind of person that I like a sense of realism, but I don't like the scenario of the game to be focused on a scenario that happens in real life. Let's say, for example, for all you Call of Duty fans or Battlefield, it's cool that there's games out like that, but I hate having games that are related to real scenarios. So I like games that are more like a fantasy setting. And so like Gears of War, it is a war, but it's Locust versus the Cog, so it's completely like something that doesn't even exist, so it's perfect. But I do see why they're adding hyperrealism to sports games, because it is that simulation, it is that immersion of feeling like you're watching an actual sports game on TV. So that's why they're adding the hyperrealism, so it feels like you're just watching a TV like sports show. But like in terms of other games, I don't really see the hyperrealism there. I don't know if this is making any sense, but anyways, it's like, for example, I just recently got the new Castlevania 2 game, Lords of Shadow, and I like the realism of the graphics when you're in like cathedrals and like downtown, like in a city, but it's not overly realistic. So it's a nice boundary to have, I think. If that made sense for you guys.
Yeah. I think I got
really
maybe
tired.
75% of that at least, so
Yeah.
we're okay. Let's move on to a different question. If we want, we can always come back to this realism thing. But here's a new question. Can art style push game design? And this is kind of tied into the realism question in a way that if you're trying to be hyper-realistic, does it constrict game design? And can, yeah.
Well, I know in Zelda Skyward Sword they were going for a very realistic look, but they decided to tone it down and go for watercolor because of the whole motion sensor, and they wanted it to be more fun. And if you were going for a more realistic look, the enemies, like the way they react to your swings and stuff, wouldn't really make much sense. So they gave it a more cartoony look to have it like make more sense, I guess, if that makes sense.
Well, because if you have a hyper-realistic simulation kind of thing where you're like, well, if I'm going to be doing this, then you notice glitches a lot sooner and a lot more of them, and you know, like, you see, well, this isn't what real life would look like, even though you probably never sat there hacking at, like, a human body, but hopefully. I don't know what you guys do in your free time. But, so, you know, that's definitely a choice that they would have made, be like, well, we can suspend our disbelief a little bit if we make this more cartoony.
What I call the reality trap. The
Yeah.
more real it gets, the more expectations goes up. We are, like just facial expressions stuff, and our brain is programmed to recognize faces and subtleties of expressions. We can tell when somebody's had a facelift or Botox injection, stuff like, because their face is just wrong. We don't know what's wrong with it or why it's wrong, but it's wrong. And so it's the stakes go up. Everything has to. Whereas when I was teaching animation to graphic designers or to non-artists, I was saying, keep it simple and graphic. The more graphic it is, the more forgiving it is. The more realistic it is, the more the expectations go up in terms of the viewer. So, you know, that's how I would, you know, equate that question.
There's a game, I can't remember the name of it right now, it's an indie game, and it's basically, the whole premise is it's a platforming fighter, but all the characters are based off of like old ancient Greek pottery.
Oh, Outlast.
Yeah.
Outlast where you have like dark, like blue and
It
red.
might be like that, but
Kind of just like Ikaruga a bit.
maybe. I don't think it's called Outlast though. But it's got a very Greek name, like not like Agamemnon, like something like that. But I just think that's an example where the entire gimmick of the game design is specifically that. Like you're basically a black and white character, you know, but you're pottery, you're fighting other pottery figures, and it's really cool, you know. But I think that might, and I think there's another one that has like terracotta as well. I think, you know, but you're asking specifically for game design being influenced by the graphics and art, and I think in that case it'd be it was like a technical showpiece, so like we'll build a game around this cool idea, which is very centric to art. But that's the only thing I can come up with.
I could actually name not a game because I don't know the name of the game yet. I don't think it's been released. I don't think the name's been released, but I can name one instance where art has influenced game design. There is a fighting game currently being developed by I guess it's a company now called Main 6, which the key difference between it's a 2D fighting game, the key difference between it and other 2D fighting games is all of their fighters are hoofed mammals.
Hooved mammals.
Yes, the reason why for this is they originally came together to make a fan game for My Little Pony,
Okay.
the new one, and it got shut down because it was getting too popular. So suddenly they found themselves with all this experience. They got Lauren Faust, who created the visual style of the show, on as an artist, and now they're making a game. And the entire premise of the game, the central hook, came because, well, they were originally trying to match this style, this art style.
Okay.
So that it actually took me a while to think of one, but there's a good example of art style being basically creating the central hook.
This is just going to be quick. I found the name of your game.
It's
Apotheon.
amazing.
Yeah.
What's it called? I'm gonna write it down because
Apotheon. Apoth.
A-P-O-T-H-E-O-N.
How old is
It's still in development. It
20.
hasn't even been finished yet. It's in development now, but I can't. If you see the demos, like it's just crazy. It's just
I'm really interested.
Can't wait to play it.
I think think my question though isn't so much about like, here is a bunch of art, let's make a game about this art. But I mean, just in my own experience with working so closely with developers, sometimes it's really interesting to me to see the relationship between if I have this awesome idea for something art-wise and a new sort of style, like can you make this happen? Like can you do this thing that I've just like thrown out there as this crazy idea? And that's kind of more what I'm talking about in terms of like art style and art. If you have like a really interesting stylized art look and feel for a game, is that more freeing to your game design and to your mechanics of the game to allow you to do that? Yeah.
Something interesting I learned about, like a teacher covered in school, was like with these photorealistic games, like I guess Call of Duty, like particularly multiplayer online shooters and stuff. The game design requires them to have to be able to react, like when the player reacts and presses a button, they have to be able, the character on the screen has to jump like as soon as you react. So you lose a lot of, I'm an animator, you lose a lot of the animation that you would see, like
The wind up.
yeah, like anticipation, you would lose that. They still have it in games, but like also like running backwards is slower than running forwards, but in a video game players need to be able to run backwards at the same speed. So like just little things like that won't look right and photorealistic, because like you were saying before, when you see it photorealistic, you want it to be like you'll notice
Like real life.
yeah, so in that way, the style of the game could be affected by the game design.
I've got one. It's the Sony handheld. My mind's farting right now. I can't remember the name. Yeah, and it's a papercraft type Indian warrior. It's all made of
Tearaway.
Yeah,
Yeah,
tearaway.
tearaway.
Yeah. That is a really great example of like an art style. You know, the creative director or whoever was like, we're gonna go with this, and we're gonna see what we can do with like paper. And that idea of having something, you know, really tactile in a virtual world, right? Something that we can all relate to, and like knowing how to play with paper, fold it up and rip it, and do all those things. And then turn that into something that, you know, is not actually a tactile thing is to me really, really interesting. One of you guys had a comment?
Yeah, I don't know whether this counts as an example, but you look at Minecraft and you look at how it looks like. And basically, you think that either the game itself drove the art style or the art style drove the game, or because the stuff that you have to do with the game, the art really has something to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. That's one to throw.
That's a. I don't know what the answer to that is, and I feel like it's a chicken or egg kind of question a little bit.
That gives a good. I know of a good example within Minecraft though is the creepers, basically the iconic enemies in Minecraft were from the modeler trying to make a pig and failing horribly.
Yeah, I remember watching a video about that. Yeah, so it's just all those happy accidents that they're like, I guess this is some misformed, crazy creature thing now. And why would we throw anything away? They're all
I
just
think it may
blocks.
also be the appeal of the cubic approach. Of everybody has fond memories of Lego, and the Lego movie being a good example of that success. And I think that's kind of, you get the same feel in Minecraft, that everything is blocky. In Lego, everything's blocky. You can still make things look kind of cool and blocky. So I think there's that nostalgia thing.
And the funny thing that I find funny about the Lego games is that it's not, you don't get that feeling, right? Which is just so weird to me. That they've come up with all these Lego games and you don't actually get to play Lego. Like, it's, I don't know. That's,
Yeah, they outdid Lego.
yeah. Let's see. Is anybody else? Yeah.
Actually, I'm not sure if it really falls into the same category, but it seems like there are a lot of games as well that exist sort of in synergy with their art style, where the art style in part informs the gameplay, but the gameplay also informs the art style. And like two examples like I can think off the top of my head, one new is Okami and Unfinished Swan.
Yep,
Both of
that's
which-
one of the ones on my list here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful game.
It really is. So those are games where like the art style, it's not entirely clear if they defined the rest of the game based on the art style, or if it's the art style is based on the game, or both of them were based on something else, which I think that's the case. It was all based on Japanese mythology and the art style that comes with it. But that seems to be an entire genre into itself in terms of art games. Not art games in the traditional sense of games that are just supposed to be artsy, but games that have art as a critical component of them.
Just out of curiosity, I've never played the Unfinished Swan, but have you played it?
Yeah.
I'm just very curious because I stumbled on it like a while ago and I meant to play it and I never did. But like I've watched the trailers and to me it seems really fantastic, but also very like I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah, it's not especially clear at first, but you kind of start to get a feel for it as you play. It's a game that's kind of hard to explain. More so as you see it happening, you start figuring it out.
I forget, is it mostly based off of like a kid's story? Like a story and then you actually, like I know there's paint involved where you have to throw it and that actually creates the level because you start out with like, just like a blank white canvas and you have to find your way by throwing paint on the walls and stuff and it makes like openings for like objects. And then I think after that it does like a description of the story of the Unfinished Swan and then you kind of just progress through that story.
Aren't you like chasing a goose or something like that?
Admittedly, I don't know the story. I've only played bits and pieces in the game.
There's a story?
That's fair. Yeah. I mean, it's to me, I'm really intrigued by the way that it looks. I haven't had the time to play it yet, but it's kind of the story of my life. Other games that come to mind when I think about like interesting arty games is like Limbo. That was one of those ones that was just kind of very different than what we're used to seeing. Or Braid. I mean, at the time that when that game came out, I know it's got like crazy hype and everybody talks about it and it's the darling of the indie game scene and blah blah blah. But it was really like this really interesting, beautiful take on like the Super Mario platformer kind of thing, right? And one other one in my mind that's really kind of stuck out to me was Sword and Sorcery. And everything that they do is just really interesting. They have a new game coming out, I forget what it's called, but it also looks really interesting. So those kinds of, I mean, to me, maybe it's just because I approach it from more of an art side, but to me, the games that really kind of inspire your imagination and make you kind of try to figure out the world a little bit more are the ones that really like stick out to me and the ones that I remember. I at the end of the day like playing Deus Ex or any of those number of first person sort of run around games and things like that, they all kind of they're all interesting and they're all beautiful, but they all kind of meld into one sort of experience for me. Whereas you get those really interesting visual games that you can they're all off on their own. They're something that you can always kind of come back to and know that it's its own unique experience.
You should look up Outlast as well. I mentioned it before, but it's kind of like Apotheon, or where you have the foreground is just all black silhouette, but the background is rich in color, and that gives that nice parallax effect when you're playing. It's just a side-scrolling platformer. But what's nice is that the enemies, even though it's like a silhouette, they're etched in either red or blue, which is a light and dark kind of theme.
Okay.
So the main character has to switch from light and dark in order to fight the opposite color. And it also has that Ikaruga, if you guys ever played that effect, where there's like light beams shooting in big umbrella spurts, or but they're so close together that you have to be strategic from getting point A to point B without getting hit, or you just match your color with the laser or with the light and you deflect it or absorb it and just get through the level. That's a really good game. I find you should take a look at it.
That reminds me of Badlands. I sadly have a lot of like mobile games. I don't have time to really do anything else, so if I'm like on the bus or whatever, I play a lot of mobile games now. And Badlands is the same kind of thing. It's like a side scroller, kind of like one of those bird flying, like, you know, yeah, that sort of a thing, or like jetpack joyride, that kind of thing, where you have to kind of like work through. But the background is very beautiful and rich, and there's all this parallax, and it's like really lush and all that. And in the foreground, and what you're interacting with in your character are all just these silhouettes. And yeah, that's all I have on that. It's a good game. Sorry?
What was the name of it?
Badlands.
Badlands?
Yeah, it was, they won a bunch of awards and stuff. It came out, I think, like 2 years ago. But it's very, very fun, very hard, I find, anyways. Here is an interesting question. Is reskinning, especially in the mobile environment, so that we think about like Candy Crush and versus Bejeweled, right? Like that's the big one that people think about now is, you know, taking an old mechanic and basically just taking art and reskinning it. Is this a valid way to present a new game? Thoughts?
If that's the only thing that they change, it's not really a very valid way of doing it.
Okay, I can definitely agree with that. What if you take something like a 2D side scroller? Like, for example, somebody mentioned to me it would be awesome if somebody took like Commander Keen and turned it into like a 3D platformer like Spyro, and take like all the level design and everything exactly the way that it was for like the old Commander Keen games, but like gave it a third dimension. And what would that be like to have, you know, that third dimension of depth and other things going on that you would not have seen in the 2D version? Is that something that's a valid form of a new game?
Well, at that point, isn't that comparable to the difference between the Super Mario Bros. From 1 to 3 and Super Mario World?
Yep, absolutely.